Spicer and Richard Goodstein, who are not going to be watching Breaking Bad tonight, who are going to be watching what we're watching as we move forward this evening. That was so funny. Good to see you both tonight. Thank you very much for being here. So, you know, in terms of the dilemma that Democrats sort of find themselves in right now, Richard Goodstein, I want to show you a quote from a piece by Thomas Friedman of the New York Times today, the title of which is "Trump's going to get reelected, isn't he?" And this is what Friedman says. He says, "I was shocked." When he's talking about watching the first Democratic debate, and he says basically he's looking for his candidate among this crowd. And he says, "I was shocked that so many candidates in the party want to get rid of private health insurance, we're ready to decriminalize illegal entry into our country, support providing comprehensive health care to undocumented immigrants." And he says, "I was shocked by how feeble the frontrunner Joe Biden's response to the attack from Kamala Harris was, and to the more extreme ideas promoted by those to his left." Things sort of getting underway here, Mike Pence. But give me an answer to that, Richard Goodstein, if you will. Do you agree with Tom Friedman?
I actually generally do. He did miss one person, Michael Bennett, who George Will just wrote a very glowing column in support of, who took issue with most of those positions. He's also at 1%. But I do think where the Democrats going at the presidential candidate level is unhelpful. But I think everything that you just discussed with the senator misses the fact that the single biggest caucus of Democrats are the New Dems, 103 of them, that those New Dems were responsible for flipping the House from red to blue, and that in the generic ballot today, Democrats beat Republicans. Who would you vote for Congress? By almost 9 points. So whatever the squad is doing, and Joe Biden's beating the president by 9, 10, 11 in all these polls. So I agree it's bad news, and yet it's not really kind of taking hold. It reminds me of what the rap was about caravans in the run-up to the 2018 election. I think the public's past that stuff.
Which turned out to exist, by the way. Let me bring in Sean Spicer here as the vice president sort of gets things warmed up here for the crowd. Sean, you know, your thoughts on that assessment, because he calls Joe Biden feeble, by the way, which is the same word that the president is using for him, and I don't think that's too good for the front runner.
No, I mean, look, I think right now you've got the proverbial tail wagging the dog of the Democratic Party. These four freshmen are defining what these longtime politicians have to respond to. It's amazing to me. I mean, Joe Biden's been in politics since 1973, and he is now taking his cues from a freshman Democrat that's 29 years old to talk about what he wants to be for president. What used to be, and I know Richard made a good point, that all these people who got them the majority, but the reality is that moderate and blue dog Democrats have gone from being an endangered species in the Democratic Party to being extinct. The agenda is being driven by these four freshman members of Congress, and it is an agenda that is going further and further towards socialism, embracing all of these things that in order for a Democratic candidate for president to get ahead, they not have to embrace, but they have to one up. And so as they do that, and I disagree with Richard, right now a poll means nothing. I mean, look at where Donald Trump was last cycle at this time. The reality is that when you have the front runners of the Democratic Party having to embrace and figure out how to one up this run to the progressive socialist left, they're going to have a big problem when it comes to explaining themselves to the American public in general.
You know, Richard, but it's very interesting to me. What Friedman is arguing is that he wants, at this next debate, he wants one of them to step forward and say, you know what? I'm not for any of those things that we just listed. I believe that if you cross the border illegally, that you have broken the law. I believe that if you like your health insurance, you can keep it. I mean, Joe Biden, for example, could really stand out if he steps forward and says, you know what, I don't agree with what they're saying on either side of me. I mean, there's a lane there for somebody who's willing to step into it.
Right. And again, what happened last cycle shows that there's a real kind of audience just among Democrats, forget the national voters kind of generally, for somebody who runs in that moderate lane. And I agree, it's kind of surprising so far that Biden's not kind of forthrightly claiming that for himself. I would say that we've had one controlled experiment, proof that the moderates are in control. Border funding was a showdown between moderates and the liberals, and the moderates won. And Pelosi backed them.
Yeah, I think on the Hill that's absolutely true. But I'm talking about on the stage and the people who are going to run against President Trump. And he's about to go out there and sort of paint your entire party as being in line with these four women. And frankly, so far what we've seen on the debate stage doesn't really negate that statement. It sort of stands up.
And what's still odd is, though, with the economy doing as well as it is, and with no new wars and everything, that Donald Trump is at low 40s in these head-to-head. I agree with Sean. The polls aren't worth much, but they're not nothing.
Sean, let me get Sean in here real quick, because I got to go right now to the vice president. Real quick, Sean.
The problem is, look, you got to listen to what Richard said. There is somebody occupying that lane. It's Michael Bennet, and he's at 1%. The people who are making up the constituency that will determine the primary and caucus goes for the Democratic Party aren't in that lane. They're in the crazy left-wing shoulder rate. They're not even in a lane. They're literally driving on the crazy shoulder of that highway. And so the problem is that people who could win a general election by being in the moderate, progressive, pragmatic lane aren't able to win a caucus or a primary in the current Democratic Party.
What we're seeing right now is that Biden is losing traction. Sanders is losing traction. Harris is moving up. She's ahead in California of Biden. And I'm watching South Carolina because the newer polls that show there are going to be very interesting to keep an eye on. Gentlemen, thank you. Stick around. We're going to watch this as it unfolds, but we're going to keep an eye on this, of course. And the other big story tonight.